Welcome to Dream or a Night, everyone. The place where we come together to listen, to unwind, and to drift gently into that sweet, peaceful sleep we all crave. I'm Daniel, your host tonight. And oh, how grateful I am that you've chosen to spend this quiet evening with us. Thank you so much for being here. Good evening, my friend. Oh, how thrilled I am that you're here with me tonight. Can you feel it already? We're about to walk together through the towering, echoing corridors of one of the most breathtaking, heartbreaking, and downright astonishing stories humanity has ever told. Picture it. We're going from a tiny cluster of shepherd huts on the muddy banks of the Tiber River, all the way to gleaming marble forums that shook the earth when legions marched past. From rough-handed warriors to emperors wrapped in purple and paranoia. This, right now, is the epic, pulse-pounding saga of the Roman Empire, and I can't wait to share it with you. Tell me quick, where in the world are you curled up listening tonight? Is it midnight where you are? Or maybe the quiet hush of 3 a.m? Are you tucked under blankets with the lights low, eyes already heavy? Or are you stealing a secret hour to slip away into the past? Wherever you are, stop for just a second. Breathe in deep. Feel that little shiver. That's 2,000 years of glory, betrayal, love, and blood waiting to rush over you. This moment, this whole incredible night, is completely, utterly yours. Here we go. Close your eyes with me. We're standing in the grey dawn on the Palatine Hill, where the morning mist still clings to the grass, like it's afraid to let go. Can you hear it? The soft, lazy murmur of the Tiber River sliding past, whispering secrets to the reeds. Right now, there's nothing here but wilderness and possibility. But one day, oh, one day, minus those same quiet floodplains will groan under the weight of marble forums, sky-high columns, and the thunder of centurions' boots. Isn't that wild to imagine? But before any of that grandeur, before the world ever trembled at the name Rome, there was a legend so powerful, it sank its roots straight into the soul of Italy. Even the biggest skeptics couldn't rip it out. Ready for the story that started it all? It's about two tiny baby boys, twin brothers, born to a Vestal virgin, named Rhea Silvia. A Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity, forbidden to ever love a man, all because her cruel uncle, King Amulius, was terrified of anyone challenging his throne. But you can't outrun fate, can you? One silent starlit night, the god Mars himself slipped down from the heavens and left Rhea with Romulus and Remus. Two perfect, helpless babies and a death sentence hanging over them. When the king found out, his order was ice cold. Throw them in the river. Just like that. A servant obeyed, heart probably breaking, and set the little basket into the muddy current of the Tiber. Imagine it rocking there, two tiny cries swallowed by the water. But spring rains had swollen the river, and instead of carrying them to their doom, the gentle current nudged the basket into the shallows, right beside the gnarled roots of an ancient fig tree. And there, padding through the dawn with glowing eyes, came a she-wolf. Now don't picture some snarling monster later stories turned her scary, but she wasn't. She was a lonely mother with empty teats and a heart full of instinct. Her fur rough, her breath warm and milky, she nosed the basket, heard the cries, and carried those two human pups back to her den beneath the Palatine Hill. She nursed them, she protected them, she kept them alive. Days or weeks later, a kind shepherd named Faustulus stumbled on the impossible scene to rosy, laughing babies playing with wolf cubs, and he scooped them up and raised them as his own. Those boys grew up wild and fearless among sheep and open sky, never dreaming that divine blood roared through their veins. Bold, you bet. Stubborn, absolutely. They wrestled, they fought, they laughed in the face of danger, and then one day the truth crashed over them like thunder. They were princes, heirs to a stolen throne. Together they stormed Alba Longa, put their grandfather back where he belonged, and suddenly the world was theirs for the taking. They could have stayed kings right there, but something bigger was calling. Can you feel the pull? That same river, those 7 hills they sang to the brothers' hearts. So Romulus and Remus headed home, burning with the dream of founding a city that would never bow to anyone. But oh, the tragedy waiting just around the corner. Even at the very beginning, Rome was born in heartbreak. The twins couldn't agree on anything, where to build, who should rule. Romulus wanted the Palatine. Remus swore by the Aventine. They turned to the gods for a sign, watching the sky for birds. Romulus claimed he saw more. Remus insisted he saw them first. Words turned to shouts. Shouts turned deadly. And suddenly there was blood soaking the sacred soil. Remus fell, dead, just like that. Whether Romulus himself swung the blade or one of his followers did, no one agrees, but only one brother walked away. One brother became everything. Heart pounding, eyes blazing with grief and iron will, Romulus drew a line in the dirt with his plough. "This," he declared, voice shaking with fury and destiny, "is Rome. Cross this boundary and die." April 21st, 753 BC. The date burned into eternity, not because of pretty stones, but because of the unbreakable will behind them. He named the city after himself and crowned himself the first king. And Rome began. Rough little huts in circles, wooden walls, tiny temples to gods no one fully understood yet. Men from nearby tribes trickled in, drawn by whispers of this fierce new place. But women, hardly any. So Romulus did something ruthless and brilliant. He threw a huge festival and invited the neighboring Sabines. Music, wine, laughter, and then, on his signal, his men seized the Sabine daughters and carried them off as brides. Brutal, yes. Horrifying, absolutely. But those forced marriages wove 2 peoples into one, and when the Sabine warriors finally came for revenge, they found their own daughters pleading for peace. Blood turned into family. The city grew. Rome kept expanding. Decades rolled by, and then one stormy day, Romulus simply vanished. A whirlwind, a crack of thunder, and the king was gone, lifted bodily into the sky, or so his awestruck followers believed. They swore he'd become a god, Quirinus, watching over the city he'd forged in fire and tears. True or not, Rome was left standing born in violence, baptized in ambition, kissed by the gods themselves. And from that very first moment, can't you see it? Myth and reality were already holding hands, dancing the same dangerous dance that would draw every border of the empire in sharp, shining steel. But right now, in these quiet early years, it's still just a scrappy village by a lazy river, holding its breath before the whole world learns its name. And yet, something incredible is stirring. The dream Romulus planted is already stretching, growing, refusing to stay small. Rome is becoming a city of mingled tribes, uneasy alliances, brand new laws trying sometimes desperately to tame the wild hearts beating inside every citizen. Romulus ruled until that stormy disappearance, and when he was gone, the throne didn't stay empty long. For more than 200 years, Rome bowed to King's 7 legendary kings in a row, each one carving his name deeper into the city's soul. The second, Numa Pompilius, a gentle Sabine with eyes full of stars, turned from swords to temples, from war cries to whispered prayers. While Romulus had raised walls, Numa gave Rome time itself, shaping the calendar, creating priests, teaching the people when to fight and when to lay down their spears and offer gifts to the gods instead. People swore the rituals came straight from heaven. And you know what? They believed it with all their hearts. Rome stopped being just a camp of warriors. It started to feel like a sacred heartbeat. Then came Tullus Hostilius. Oh, what a contrast. He spat on peace and lived for the clash of iron. He crushed Alba Longa, dragged its nobles to Rome, and swelled the Senate with new blood. Ancus Marcius threw bridges across the Tiber and pushed Roman hands westward, turning a village into a real city of roads and rituals, warriors and craftsmen, all bound together by the craziest shared dream any of them had ever dared to dream. The monarchy was strong, but never absolute. There was always the Senate, those grizzled elders whispering advice, and the people gathered in tribes and curiae, shouting their tiny voices into the wind. And then everything sped up. The last 3 kings came from the mysterious north, from the brilliant, shadowy Etruscans who brought engineering wonders, strange new gods, and symbols that made Roman eyes go wide. Tarquinius Priscus kicked off the Circus Maximus can. You imagine the roar of those first chariot races. Servius Tullius, born to a slave woman, yet rising on pure merit. How's that for a rags-to-riches legend? Carved the city into districts, counted every citizen, and reorganized the army into centuries so tight and disciplined it scared enemies half to death. His reforms shone like gold until blood ended it all. His own son-in-law murdered him in the dark and seized the throne. Lucius Tarquinius, Superbus Tarquin, the proud, stormed in like a tyrant from a nightmare. He ripped away rights, ignored the Senate, ruled with a whip and a sneer. He dreamed big-started the massive temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, the most breathtaking building Italy had ever seen. But he built it on cruelty and fear, and in the end, his own house betrayed him. His son committed an unspeakable crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia, and when she took her own life in the public square, rather than live with the shame, something inside Rome finally snapped. Can you feel the rage rising? The heartbreak, the absolute refusal to bow any longer? That single drop of blood lit the fuse. Lucius Junius Brutus stood up, voice shaking with fury and hope, and the people rose with him. The king was hurled out, his whole family banished forever, and the word king itself became poison on Roman tongues. From that moment on, Rome swore it would never again kneel to one man. Something brand new, trembling, and beautiful was about to be born, and oh, the price it would pay to keep that promise. Oh my God, can you feel the air in Rome that night? It's thick with horror and fury. According to the old stories, Sextus Tarquinius, that spoiled, arrogant prince, forced himself on a noblewoman named Lucretia, one of the purest, most respected women in the city. The violation broke her. In front of her father, her husband, and the men who loved her, she drew a dagger, told them exactly what had happened. And then right there in the atrium. She drove the blade into her own heart. Can you even imagine the scream that ripped through that house? The blood on the marble floor. That single act of despair lit a wildfire of rage across Rome's leading families. Lucius Junius Brutus, yes, the same man who would become a legend, stood over her body, pulled the dagger from her chest, and swore on her blood that kings would rule Rome no more. The people rose up like a tidal wave. The king was hunted down, expelled in disgrace, his entire family banished forever. The monarchy, done, finished, over. Rome had drawn a line in blood and said, never again. And in its place, get this, they invented something the world had barely dreamed of. A government where power belonged to elected magistrates, not to one man with a crown. The Republic was born that day, fragile as a newborn foal, trembling but alive. The memory of kings still haunted them. Half respect for the order they once brought, half terror at the tyranny they became. For centuries after, just whisper the word king in Rome and watch grown men reach for their swords. They never forgot Lucretia's blood on the floor. They never forgot what happens when one man holds power too tight. So they shattered the crown, handed the sword to the people, and dared to believe they could rule themselves. Or so they thought, because the story was only getting started, and already you could hear the heartbeat of what Rome would become. Glory forged in violence, greatness hammered out through endless struggle, and that burning, desperate hunger to build something that would outlive every single one of them. The monarchy fell, yes, but out of its ashes rose this wild, untested, beautiful idea called the res publica, the public thing. No more kings. Instead, every year the people would choose 2 consuls. 2, equal in power, each one watching the other like a hawk, so neither could ever grab the throne. Genius, right? The Senate stayed on as the wise old guardians, and new assemblies sprang up so citizens could shout their opinions, even if some voices still shouted louder than others. On paper, it looked perfect. In real life, messy, loud, and absolutely thrilling. But here's the gut punch nobody saw coming. The Republic's very first enemy wasn't some foreign horde. It was inside the city walls, the poisonous divide between the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians, those were the old money families, the ones whose granddaddies had advised kings, who owned half the land in Italy and honestly believed ruling was their birthright. And the plebeians, that was everybody else. The farmers who fed the city, the artisans who built it, the soldiers who bled for it. Yet they were locked out of power, forbidden to marry into noble families, and governed by secret, unwritten laws that only the elite understood. How unfair is that? How long do you think people would put up with it? Not long. In 494 BCE, the plebeians did something that still gives me chills. They walked out, just picked up and left the city, climbed the sacred mount and said, "Fine, starve without us, fight your own wars." Rome ground to a halt. No workers, no soldiers, no food. The patricians panicked and finally caved. They created the tribunes of the plebsmen who were sacrosanct, untouchable, whose entire job was to protect the common people and veto anything unfair coming from the Senate or consuls. One man with one word could stop the whole government cold. It was a revolution, one without a single sword raised. But it was only the beginning. The fight dragged on for generations. The plebeians kept pushing, Write the laws down. Let us see justice. And finally, they got the 12 Tables Rome's first public law code, carved in bronze and nailed up in the forum where every farmer, every slave, every child could read their rights with their own eyes. No more secret rules, no more invisible chains. Victory, yes, but never total. The patricians gave ground inch by inch, always scheming to take it back somewhere else. Still, brick by brick, protest by protest, Rome was teaching itself that real strength isn't inherited. It's earned through argument, pressure, and compromise. That's the republic they were building. Not perfect, but stubborn, persistent, alive. Then the world outside the walls started knocking hard. Rome wasn't alone on the peninsula. There were Latin cities, fierce Sabine hill tribes, the warlike Volsci, proud Etruscan kings, Greek colonies glittering on the coast. Everybody wanted a piece of everybody else. Rome learned war the way other kids learn to walk, by falling down and getting back up bloodied. And in 390 BCE came the nightmare no one saw coming. A Gallic army poured down from the north like a blizzard. The Roman legions shattered. The Senate was butchered in their own chamber. The city burned. Only the Capitoline Hill held out. And legend says it was the sacred geese of Juno, honking and flapping in the night, that woke the defenders just in time. Rome paid a fortune in gold to make the Gauls leave, and the shame of it sank into every Roman heart like a hot blade. But you know what they did with that shame? They turned it into steel. They rebuilt bigger walls, tougher legions, and swore on every god they knew. Never again. The Republic staggered, bled, fractured, but it refused to die. In just a couple of generations, it grew from a scarred survivor into something new. A living, breathing creature of change that got stronger every time it broke and healed. And that's when Rome looked around and said, wait, this whole peninsula is ours to take. It didn't happen in one glorious charge. It was slow, brutal, exhausting. Every valley, every mountain pass, every stubborn little city had to be fought for, bled for, argued for. After the Gallic nightmare, Rome locked down its borders and started pushing. The Latin League old allies who suddenly decided they didn't want to follow Rome anymore got crushed so completely they were never the same. Rome tore the League apart and tied every city directly to itself with treaties so clever they were practically handcuffs wrapped in silk. Keep your gods, keep your festivals, but your soldiers fight for Rome now. Then came the Samnites. Oh man, those mountain warriors were terrifying. Guerrilla fighters who knew every rock and ravine. Rome and the Samnites slammed into each other again and again in wars that lasted generations. At the Caudine Forks, the humiliation was total. An entire Roman army forced to strip and march under a yoke like cattle. Roman pride hit rock bottom. But did they quit? No way. They came back meaner, smarter, deadlier. Roads got better, alliances got tighter, legions learned new tricks, and slowly, painfully, the Samnites broke. Finally, Rome turned south to the glittering Greek cities of Magna Graecia rich, cultured, and convinced Romans were barbarians in togas. Those cities looked down their noses until Roman legions showed up at the gates. And that, my friend, is when the real fun and the real heartbreak was only just beginning. Because Italy was almost theirs. But across the water waited Carthage, and beyond that, the whole wide world. Can you feel the ground shaking yet? Rome's about to stop being a city and start becoming a legend. Oh, sweet mercy, here it comes. The moment Rome's shadow finally stretched all the way to the sea. When little Tarentum, that proud Greek city on the heel of Italy, felt Rome breathing down its neck, they panicked and sent an SOS across the waves. Who answered? None other than King Pyrrhus of Epirus' cousin to Alexander the Great, swaggering in with war elephants thundering like living siege towers, perfectly drilled phalanxes, and a grin that said, "I've done this before." The Romans marched out to meet him, hearts pounding, and bam! Pyrrhus smashed them at Heraclea, then again at Asculum. Rome bled like never before. But every time Pyrrhus climbed a hill of Roman corpses to plant his banner, he looked back and saw half his own army gone. After one more victory, he allegedly threw up his hands and cried, "One more win like that and I'm finished." You've heard of Pyrrhic victories. This is the original. His grand campaign crumbled under its own weight. The elephants starved, the mercenaries melted away, and Pyrrhus sailed home a broken man. Rome? Battered, bruised, bleeding from every pore, but still standing, still breathing fire. Can you believe it? By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, there wasn't a single city, tribe or king left on the Italian peninsula who could look Rome in the eye and say no. Samnites? Subdued. Etruscans? Swallowed whole. Greek colonies. One by one, they either opened their gates or had them kicked in. And Rome didn't just slap the same government on everybody. Oh no, that would have been too easy and too dangerous. They stitched together the most brilliantly sneaky patchwork you've ever seen. Full citizenship here, half citizenship there, independent allies over there who had to cough up soldiers every single spring. It was divide and conquer genius. Every city loved Rome just enough to stay loyal, but hated its neighbours too much to ever team up. With Italy finally locked down, Rome suddenly had more tough, battle-hardened men under arms than anyone knew what to do with. Roads spiderwebbing across the mountains, and this white-hot sense of destiny burning in every Roman heart like lava under granite. You could almost hear the gods whispering, "Your story's just getting started." But across that sparkling, treacherous sea, something else was rising. Something sleek and rich and dangerous. Carthage. Have you ever pictured it? Massive double harbours, one for merchants, one for warships. Walls so thick you could drive a chariot across the top. Streets smelling of spice and purple dye and money. While Rome had been bleeding its way across Italy, Carthage had been counting coins from Spain to Africa, sails on every horizon. For years, the two powers just eyed each other, like two wolves circling the same watering hole. Then, Sicily beautiful, fertile, perfectly placed Sicily, sat, right there between them like a powder keg with a short fuse. It all exploded in the blink of an eye. A bunch of rowdy mercenaries called the Mamertines seized the city of Messana, right on the toe of Italy, and suddenly found themselves staring down both Rome and Carthage. Carthage got there first, all smooth diplomacy and warships. Rome looked across that narrow strait and thought, if they plant a flag there, they're 30 miles from my doorstep. Hell no. The Senate argued, hands trembled, but in the end they shipped legions across the water. That cautious little decision, it lit a century of total war. The First Punic War had begun, and neither side was ready for what they'd just unleashed. Carthage owned the sea-owned Ite. Rome had maybe a dozen rusty boats, but you know Romans. Tell them they can't do something and watch them do it twice as hard. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme, reverse-engineered the thing overnight, built 100 more, and invented this insane boarding ramp called the corvus, a giant spike that dropped from the mast and turned every sea fight into a street brawl on floating planks. For 24 brutal years, the Mediterranean ran red. Rome lost entire fleets to storms, hundreds of ships, thousands of men swallowed in a single night, and just built more the next morning. Sicily became a butcher's yard. Finally, in 241 BCE, off the Aegean Islands, Rome caught the Carthaginian navy napping and smashed it to splinters. Carthage begged for peace. Rome took Sicily, their very first province overseas, and the Republic had officially stepped off the peninsula and onto the world stage. Somebody pinch me. But peace? That was a joke. The wounds were too deep, the grudges too fresh. Carthage licked its wounds, turned west to Spain, started mining silver and rebuilding armies. Rome watched like a hawk, and then, in 218 BCE, a name exploded across the Mediterranean that still makes Roman schoolboys wake up screaming: Hannibal Barca. This guy's son of a general from the First War had sworn on an altar when he was 9 years old that he would never be friends with Rome, and at 29, he kept that promise in the most insane way possible. Picture it: 50,000 men, thousands of horses, and get this, 37 war elephants, marching out of Spain, across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and then straight up and over the freaking Alps in winter. Blizzards, avalanches, tribes attacking from the cliffs. Hannibal lost half his army and most of his elephants before he ever saw Italy. But the half that stumbled down those snowy peaks was still the most terrifying sight Rome had ever seen. And then he started winning. Trebia River ambush, massacre, Lake Trasimene, another ambush, another massacre, and then Cannae. Oh God, Cannae. 50,000 Romans surrounded, crushed, cut to pieces in a single afternoon. The worst single-day defeat in Roman history. Bodies stacked so high you couldn't see the ground. Rome panicked. Temples overflowed with weeping mothers. Senators talked about abandoning the city. But surrender? Never. Not one Roman went to negotiate peace. They just kept fighting. They picked a dictator named Fabius Maximus, who refused to give Hannibal the big battle he wanted, just shadowed him, burned the fields, cut the supply lines, drove Hannibal crazy. For 15 years, Hannibal roamed Italy undefeated, a wolf in the henhouse, and Rome bled, but never broke. Meanwhile, a young genius named Publius Cornelius Scipio took the war to Spain, captured their silver mines, and then bold as brass, sailed to Africa and threatened Carthage itself. Finally, in 202 BCE at Zama, Scipio and Hannibal met face to face. This time, the elephants panicked and trampled their own lines. The Roman cavalry came screaming back from the flanks, and Carthage's invincible general tasted defeat for the first time. Hannibal lived, but Carthage was finished. Rome stripped away their fleet, their war elephants, their freedom to even fight without permission. Scipio came home. Africanus, conqueror of Africa, and Rome stood alone atop the western Mediterranean, like a blood-soaked colossus. That war scarred Rome to the bone, but it also forged something unbreakable inside them. They learned that brilliance alone doesn't win. Hannibal had brilliance in spades. What wins is the stubborn, insane refusal to quit. A system that can lose 80,000 men in 3 battles and still raise new armies the next spring. Rome didn't just survive Hannibal. They studied him, absorbed him, became him, but tougher. And when the smoke cleared, the republic that looked out over the sea wasn't the same scrappy city-state anymore. It was bigger, hungrier, ready to stop defending and start dominating. The Mediterranean wasn't a shared playground anymore. It was starting to look like a Roman lake. Carthage limped along, paying tribute, trading, trying to recover. Rome watched every shipment of Spanish silver like a hawk watching a mouse. And somewhere in the Senate halls, old men were already muttering that as long as Carthage breathed, Rome would never sleep easy. The stage was set for the final act, and oh, it was going to be brutal. Can you feel the tension crackling in the air? Because Rome's story is about to go from epic to apocalyptic. Oh, sweet Jupiter. Can you feel the hatred boiling in the Roman Senate? There were old men there, hard, scarred, victorious men who woke up every single morning tasting the smoke of Cannae in their nightmares. They looked across the sea at Carthage, saw her markets bustling again, saw her walls gleaming white under the African sun, and they clenched their fists until the knuckles went white. Never again, they whispered. And the loudest voice of all belonged to Cato the Elder, this grizzled, stubborn, farmer-turned-senator who ended every single speech, no matter if he was talking about roads, grain prices, or the weather, with the same chilling words. Ceterum censeo, Carthaginem esse delendum. Carthage must be destroyed, day after day, year after year, like a drumbeat of doom. And in 149 BCE, Carthage finally gave them the excuse they'd been praying for. She raised an army just to defend herself against a neighboring king, and Rome pounced like a wolf on a wounded deer. The Third Punic War wasn't a war, it was an execution. 50,000 Romans sailed south not to negotiate, not to conquer, but to erase. Carthage barred her gates and fought with the fury of a dying animal. For 3 heartbreaking years, the city starved behind her walls, while Roman siege towers scraped the sky. Mothers fed their children leather from their sandals. Fires roared through neighborhoods. When the legions finally smashed through in 146 BCE, they didn't take the city, they murdered it. Street by street, house by house, room by room. Screams echoed off the temples as soldiers dragged women and children into chains or cut them down where they stood. The once proud queen of the seas was torn apart, her stones scattered, her people sold or slaughtered. Legend says Scipio Aemilianus stood on the burning walls, tears running down his face, quoting Homer about how one day Troy, someone else's Troy, would fall too. And when it was over, some say they ploughed salt into the earth so nothing would ever grow again. Poetic. Maybe. True. Doesn't matter. The message was crystal clear. Rome would suffer no rival. Ever. But that same year, 146 BCE, mark it on your heart, Rome turned her blades east and did the exact same thing to Corinth, the glittering heart of Greek commerce. Statues toppled, temples burned, libraries looted, masterpieces of art crated up and shipped west like common plunder. In a single blood-soaked year, the 2 greatest civilizations that had ever challenged Rome-Carthage in the west, Greece in the east, were reduced to smoking ruins. The symmetry still gives me chills. Rome stood alone on the stage, chest heaving, sword dripping. and the whole Mediterranean suddenly looked very, very small. And then the money started pouring in. Rivers of it, gold from Spanish mines, grain from African fields, spices from Arabia, marble from Greek quarries, slaves by the hundreds of thousands. Senators came home from administrative postings, richer than kings, building villas that sprawled across hillsides like palaces. Rome herself exploded temples of dazzling white marble, aqueducts arching over valleys, forums packed with victory monuments gleaming in the sun. Triumphal parades rolled through the streets every other month, captured kings in chains, wagons groaning under treasure, legions roaring their battle cries, while flower petals rained from the rooftops. It should have been paradise, right? Rome on top of the world. So why does it feel like the ground is already cracking beneath their feet? Because beneath all that glory, something was rotting. The old citizen soldier who used to fight one summer and go home to plough his fields. He was disappearing. Men now campaigned for 10, 15 years at a stretch in Spain, Africa, Asia Minor. And when they finally limped home with their scars and their savings, what did they find? Their little farm swallowed by some senator's giant latifundia, worked now by chains of silent slaves. Creditors had taken everything while they were gone. No land, no vote, no future. So they poured into Rome-angry, broke, proud veterans reduced to begging for grain handouts. The city swelled until it groaned. 6, 7-story tenements stacked like honeycombs, fire traps stuffed with the desperate and the furious. And up on the Senate benches, the same families, generation after generation, growing fat on war profits while preaching tradition and republican virtue. The gap between rich and poor wasn't just wide, it was a canyon. And into that canyon stepped 2 brothers who still believed the Republic could be saved. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, born into one of the noblest families in Rome, yet raised with fire in their hearts for the common people. Tiberius struck first in 133 BCE. As tribune of the plebs, he looked at all that public land illegally hogged by the elite and said, "Enough." He proposed taking it back and giving every poor citizen a plot to feed his family. It was legal. It was ancient law. It was fair. And the Senate lost their minds. They screamed that he was trying to make himself king. When Tiberius brave, desperate Tiberius ran for re-election just to finish the job, they didn't argue in the forum anymore. They grabbed clubs and chair legs, chased him up the Capitoline steps, and beat him to death right there on the sacred hill. His body 300 supporters too was dumped into the Tiber like garbage. The message was brutal and unmistakable. Rome would let her people starve before she let anyone touch senatorial privilege. 10 years later, his younger brother Gaius picked up the bloodied banner. Charismatic, brilliant, unstoppable Gaius. He didn't just want land. He wanted subsidized grain for the poor, citizenship for Rome's Italian allies, courts taken away from corrupt senators. Crowds worshipped him. The people roared his name. And the Senate, they played it smarter this time. They waited, whispered, turned public opinion, armed rival tribunes. When the riots finally exploded, the Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree, basically a license to kill. Gaius ran. Cornered on a wooded slope across the Tiber, he looked at his slave, handed him a dagger, and said, "Do it quickly. Better this than their hands on me." The slave wept, but he obeyed. Gaius's head was cut off, weighed, and paid for in gold. His followers were hunted down like animals. That was the moment everything changed. The Gracchi's blood soaked into the stones, and something dark took root. Politics wasn't about debate anymore. It was about who was willing to kill first. The Senate had shown it would murder its own to keep power, and ambitious men watching from the wings took careful notes. Violence wasn't the last resort now. It was the new currency. And the man who understood that better than anyone was about to step onto the stage, a rough, tough, common-born general named Gaius Marius Hero of Africa, saviour against the northern barbarians, 7 times consul, and the first to realise that in this new Rome, the road to power didn't run through the Senate anymore. It ran through the legions who loved you enough to march on the city itself. Can you hear the marching boots getting louder? Because the Republic is bleeding, and the men who will finish her off are already sharpening their swords. Oh my God, can you feel the ground shaking? The Republic is cracking wide open, and the man who just lit the fuse is Gaius Marius. This rough, brilliant, dirt-common genius who looked at the old rules and said, "Watch me burn them down." He did the unthinkable. He opened the legions to the capite sensi, the landless poor, the men who had nothing but strong arms and empty bellies. Suddenly, thousands of desperate Romans were handed a shield, a sword, and a promise. "Follow me and I'll give you a future." And they loved him for it. They loved him more than they loved the Senate, more than they loved the Republic itself. Marius crushed the Jugurthine rebels in Africa, then turned north and smashed 2 massive barbarian invasions, Cimbri and Teutones, who were thundering down like the end of the world. Rome hailed him as her 3rd founder, gave him consulship after consulship 6, then 7 times. The old traditions screamed that no man should hold that kind of power year after year. But Marius just laughed and kept winning. He proved that if the people cheered your name and the legions marched behind you, the marble tablets of law meant nothing. And Rome never forgot the lesson. Then came Lucius Cornelius Sulla, ice-cold aristocrat, genius general, and Marius's mortal enemy. When the two clashed over who would command the glorious war against Mithridates in the east, Sulla did the unimaginable. He turned his legions around and marched on Rome herself. Roman eagles pointed at the capital, the city that had never been entered by its own army since the kings fell, now watched in horror as Sulla's soldiers poured through the gates. He hunted Marius down, forced him into exile, and crowned himself dictator, yes, dictator, a title that hadn't been used in over a century. Marius came roaring back with blood in his eyes, and for weeks the streets ran red. Prescription lists were nailed up in the forum. Anyone's name could appear, and within hours, their door was kicked in, their throat cut, their property seized, their children left orphans. Sulla won in the end, posted his own lists, killed thousands more, and claimed he was restoring the Republic. Restoring it? He gutted it. When he finally retired to his villa board, sick, still terrifying, he left behind a government that looked the same on the outside, but was hollow inside. The Republic had survived Hannibal, survived Carthage burning, but now it was devouring itself. Elections were rigged, streets were ruled by gangs, and the Senate just reacted, never led. Somewhere in the quiet nights, ordinary Romans stopped looking to laws for safety and started looking for a strong man, any strong man. And into that bleeding, burning chaos, stepped a young patrician with a name that already carried magic: Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar descended from Venus herself, or so the family proudly claimed. He grew up watching Sulla's killers drag friends and relatives into the night. Learned before he was 20 that in this new Rome, you either seized power or you died. But oh, what a charmer. Tall, elegant, brilliant tongue that could make a crowd weep or roar, eyes that saw 10 moves ahead. He studied rhetoric until he could twist the Senate around his finger, served in the legions until he wore the civic crown for saving a comrade's life, then climbed the political ladder with a smile that hid pure steel. He chose the populares, the party of the people through lavish games that bankrupted him, but made the plebs love him, wept publicly for his dead wife to show he had a heart, and never, ever forgot a face or a favour. He knew one man couldn't rule alone anymore, so he built the most dangerous alliance Rome had ever seen, the first triumvirate: Caesar, the rising star; Pompey, the conquering hero who'd cleared the seas of pirates; and Crassus, the richest man alive who could buy half the Senate before breakfast. Behind closed doors, they carved up the Republic like a roast. In 59 BCE, Caesar became consul and rammed through laws that made the old guard screamland for Pompey's veterans, contracts for Crassus's tax collectors, and for himself, the Dream Command, Gaul, 10 years to conquer the wild north. And conquer he did. For nearly a decade, Rome heard nothing but thunder from beyond the Alps. Caesar, smashing tribe after tribe, crossing the Rhine just to prove he could, landing in mysterious Britain where no Roman had dared before. He wrote his commentaries, dispatches so gripping they were read aloud in the forum like adventure novels. His soldiers would have died for him 1,000 times. They called him Father, tattooed his name on their arms. Back home, the people adored him. The Senate feared him. And his power grew until it cast a shadow no Republican institution could escape. But alliances crack. Crassus died screaming in the Parthian desert, his mouth filled with molten gold. Pompey, left alone in Rome, grew jealous, then terrified. The Senate led by men who saw Caesar as the next Sulla, or worse, ordered him home without his army. Disarm or be declared a traitor. It was a line drawn in pure fear. And Caesar? He stood on the banks of a tiny river called the Rubicon, looked at his officers, and spoke the words that changed history. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. Then he crossed. Civil war. Rome exploded. Pompey fled east. Caesar chased. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, the two greatest Romans of their generation faced off former friends, former allies, and Caesar crushed him, though outnumbered 2-1. Pompey ran to Egypt, stepped off the boat, and a blade flashed. When Caesar landed days later, they handed him his rival's severed head on a platter. He didn't gloat. He wept real tears. Or the greatest acting job in history, we'll never know. Then he stayed, got tangled up with the most dangerous woman alive, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Brilliant, seductive, ruthless. They sailed the Nile together, made a son, dreamed dreams that would have made Alexander blush. When Caesar finally came home, there was no one left to say no. Dictator for a year, then for 10, then for life. He fixed the calendar, yes, the one we still use. Forgave debts, settled veterans on new lands, packed the Senate with loyalists, put his face on coins, sat on a golden throne. He refused the crown Antony offered in public 3 times, but everyone saw the truth. The Republic was a ghost wearing Caesar's purple cloak, and some men couldn't bear it. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, a knot of senators, many of them Caesar's own friends, men he'd pardoned and promoted, surrounded him in the theatre of Pompey. Daggers flashed, 23 wounds. He fell at the base of Pompey's statue, blood pooling on the marble, covering his face with his toga, when he saw Brutus among the killers. Kai su teknon. You too, my child. The conspirators thought they'd saved liberty. Instead, they murdered the only man holding the Republic together. The city didn't cheer. It mourned. Mark Antony stood in the forum, held up Caesar's blood-soaked toga, read the will that left money to every Roman citizen, and turned his gardens into public parks. The crowd went from stunned to furious. Funeral pyres lit the night. Mobs hunted the assassins through the streets. Rome didn't want the Republic back. She wanted vengeance. And in Caesar's will was one final bombshell. His heir wasn't a famous general or grizzled senator. It was an 18-year-old boy studying in Apollonia, pale, sickly, unknown to most. His name was Gaius Octavius, and in one stroke of a pen, he became Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, adopted son of a god. The Republic was already dying. This teenager was about to bury it and build something the world had never seen before. Can you feel the storm coming? Because the age of Caesar is over and the age of emperors is about to begin. And there he was, 18 years old, pale as parchment, studying rhetoric in far-off Apollonia, when the messenger ship flew black sails into the harbour. Caesar is dead, stabbed, murdered in the Senate. And hold your breath. You, Gaius Octavius, are now his son, his heir, the adopted Gaius Julius Caesar. Can you even imagine what that felt like? One moment, a nobody teenager with a cough and big dreams. The next, the most dangerous name in the world hanging around your neck like a burning crown. Did his hands shake when he read the will? Did his heart scream, "Run," or "Take it"? We'll never know. What we do know is he didn't hesitate. He kissed his mother goodbye, stepped onto the deck, and sailed straight into the storm. He landed at Brundisium with nothing but a few friends, a handful of coins, and a name that made legionaries drop to one knee and senators reach for their daggers. Rome was a madhouse, riots in the streets, assassins hiding behind every column, Mark Antony strutting around like he already owned the place. But this boy, this quiet, cold-eyed boy, walked into the city like he'd been born wearing the purple. He didn't scream for revenge. He didn't challenge the Senate to their faces. He smiled. He listened. He waited like a spider in the dark. And when the moment was perfect, he shook hands with Antony and Lepidus and formed the second triumvirate. Legal? Barely. Bloody. Oh, you have no idea. They posted prescription lists longer than your arm thousands butchered, Cicero's head and hands nailed to the rostrum, because he dared write against Antony. Rivers of noble blood, so the three could restore order. And then they turned east to hunt the men who'd killed their father. Philippi, 42 BCE, Brutus and Cassius, the self-proclaimed liberators, waited on a windswept plain with everything they had. Octavian was sick, half dead in his tent. But Antony led the charge, and the Republic's last hope shattered. When it was over, Brutus fell on his own sword, whispering, "Virtue, you are a name." Cassius did the same. The men who murdered Caesar to save freedom died screaming that freedom was dead. And somewhere in that muddy field, the Roman Republic took its last breath. But alliances built on corpses don't last. Octavian and Antony started circling each other like wolves. Antony rode east, fell deeper and deeper under the spell of Cleopatra Queen, lover, living goddess. They staged spectacles in Alexandria that made Roman jaws drop. Antony dressed as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis, their children crowned kings while still in diapers. Rome seethed. "Traitor," they hissed. "He's gone native." Meanwhile, Octavian stayed home, cloaked himself in old-fashioned Roman virtue, fixed roads, settled veterans, whispered that he was the true defender of everything sacred. By 31 BCE, the mask was off. The final showdown came at Actium II, huge fleets clawing at each other off the Greek coast. Antony and Cleopatra fought like lions, but when their center broke, they turned and fled, sails full of shame. A year later, cornered in Alexandria, Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra legend says with an asp at her breast, followed him into death rather than be dragged in chains through Rome. The last obstacle crumbled. Octavian stood alone atop the ruins, 29 years old, master of the world. And here's the genius move that still makes historians gasp. He didn't crown himself king. He knew Rome would rip itself apart first. Instead, he walked into the Senate, modestly laid down his powers, and let them beg him to take them back. They gave him the name Augustus, the revered one. Princeps, first citizen. A humble servant of the state, wink wink. In reality, the army swore oaths to him alone. The treasury answered to him. The Senate voted whatever he whispered. The Republic was a beautiful corpse in expensive makeup, and Augustus was the gentle undertaker who convinced everyone it was just sleeping. And then, oh then, the miracle happened. After a century of civil war, the gates of the Temple of Janus were closed. Peace. Real peace. They called it the Pax Romana, and for the first time in forever, the Mediterranean wasn't on fire. Augustus poured money into roads that still stand today, aqueducts that carried crystal water over mountains, temples that made poets weep. He turned a city of brick into a city of marble, just like he promised. He created a professional standing army loyal to the emperor, not to random generals. He formed the Praetorian Guard 9 cohorts of elite killers, whose job was to make sure no one ever did to him what had been done to Caesar. He ruled for 41 years, long enough for babies born the day he took power to grow up, have children, and die never knowing any ruler but him. When he finally breathed his last in 14 CE at the age of 75, whispering to friends, "Have I played the part well?" then applaud as I exit, the Senate didn't hesitate. They declared him a god. Temples shot up overnight. The Republic was gone, and nobody even cried. They traded liberty for peace, chaos for order, and most of them thought they got the better deal. But on his deathbed, Augustus left one terrifying question hanging in the air. Who's next? He'd had no sons that lived. He'd adopted, lost, adopted again. Grandsons, nephews, stepsons. Death kept stealing them away. In the end, the purple fell to Tiberius, his brooding, brilliant, deeply unhappy stepson. Tiberius never wanted the job, but duty was duty. He took the throne with all the joy of a man swallowing poison. Rome held its breath. At first, everything ran smoothly. Provinces quiet, legions loyal, taxes flowing. But Tiberius trusted no one. He retreated to his palace, then to the island of Capri, surrounded by astrologers and pleasures too dark to name, while Rome whispered about monsters. he leaned harder and harder on the Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, a smooth, ruthless climber who started believing the throne was his for the taking. For years, Sejanus ruled as the Shadow Emperor, arresting, executing, terrorizing, until one day a letter from Capri arrived. Tiberius had finally woken up. Sejanus was seized in the Senate itself, strangled that same night, his body dragged through the streets and thrown into the Tiber while the crowd cheered. The reign of terror rolled on senators forced to open their veins, mothers denounced by sons, the air thick with fear. When Tiberius finally died in 37 CE, smothered with pillows, if the rumors are true, the empire exhaled, and then gasped, because the next in line was his grandnephew, a beautiful golden boy the soldiers had nicknamed Caligula, Little Boots, when he toddled around camp in a tiny uniform. The people went wild with joy. He was Germanicus's son, a real Julian, young, handsome, generous. He pardoned prisoners, threw coins to the crowd, staged games that lasted weeks. Rome thought the golden age was back. For 6 months, it was paradise. Then something snapped. Fever, trauma, madness. We'll never know. Caligula declared himself a living god, paraded through Rome dressed as Jupiter, ordered senators to kiss his feet, made his horse a consul just to watch them squirm. He executed for fun, bankrupted the treasury on floating palaces and jewels, murdered cousins at dinner parties. After 4 years of nightmare, his own praetorians cut him down in a palace corridor, stabbing him 30 times while he screamed, "I'm still alive!" Chaos. The guards ransacked the palace looking for anyone to proclaim emperor. They found a trembling figure hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, the limping, stammering uncle everyone had laughed at his whole life. They dragged him out, half dead with terror, and hailed him as imperator. The Senate blinked, shrugged, and said, "Fine." And to everyone's shock, Claudius turned out to be one of the best rulers Rome ever had. He conquered Britain, built harbours, reformed the courts, wrote histories nobody was allowed to read. But he married badly, very badly. His last wife, Agrippina the Younger, wanted the throne for her son Nero. One poisoned mushroom plate later, or so the story goes, Claudius was dead, and in 54 CE, a 17-year-old boy with dreamy eyes and a lyre stepped onto the stage. At first, it was golden again, guided by Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. Nero lowered taxes, held poetry readings, acted like a philosopher prince. Rome swooned. Then the leash snapped. He murdered his mother with a collapsing boat. When that failed, he just sent soldiers. He kicked his pregnant wife to death. He performed on stage while senators clapped through gritted teeth. And in 64 CE came the Great Fire. 9 days Rome burned. Whole districts reduced to ash. Rumor said Nero sang from his palace roof, watching the flames. He blamed the Christians, fed them to lions, lit his gardens with living torches. Then he built the Golden House, a palace so huge it swallowed the heart of the city, complete with a 120-foot statue of himself as the sun god. The provinces revolted. The legions marched. In 68 CE, Nero woke to find the palace empty, the guards gone. He fled in disguise, trembling, and when the horsemen came for him, he couldn't even hold the dagger steady. A slave helped him cut his own throat, whimpering, "What an artist the world is losing!" The Julio-Claudian dynasty, Augustus's own bloodline, died with him in a dusty villa outside Rome, and the empire, exhausted, bleeding, but somehow still standing, waited to see what fresh madness the next throw of the dice would bring. Oh God, picture it. Rome in flames, 9 days of roaring fire that swallowed whole neighborhoods, and there on his palace roof stands Nero, lyre in hand, singing about the fall of Troy, while the real city burns beneath him. When the ashes finally cooled, he didn't rush to help the homeless. He didn't open the treasury for bread. He seized the scorched heart of the capital and built the Golden House, a pleasure palace so obscene it had its own artificial lake, rotating dining rooms, and a 120-foot statue of himself as the sun god. Rome stared in stunned horror. And when people whispered, "Who could have done this?" Nero needed a scapegoat. He pointed at the Christians, this tiny, weird sect that refused to sacrifice to the gods and unleashed hell in men, women, children sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs, crucified along the roads and set alight as living torches, while Nero hosted garden parties by their flickering light. The cruelty was theatrical, endless, gleeful. He murdered his own mother, first a collapsing boat, then swords when she swam ashore. Kicked his pregnant wife Poppaea to death in a fit of rage. Casually executed senators who looked at him funny. The monster in the purple had finally dropped every mask. By 68 CE, the provinces had had enough. Spain, Gaul, Africa, legions raised their standards for new emperors, and the praetorians who once guarded Nero now turned their backs. The Senate declared him public enemy. At 30 years old, the last Julio Claudian woke up to an empty palace. No friends, no guards, no escape. He fled in a servant's cloak, trembling, weeping, begging slaves to kill him because his own hand shook too hard. Finally, one drove the blade home while Nero sobbed, "What an artist dies in me!" The bloodline that began with divine Augustus ended in a roadside ditch outside Rome. The dynasty was dead, but the empire just took a deep breath and kept standing. And then came the year of the 4 emperors, 69 CE, one of the most insane, terrifying years in Roman history. Galba, old and stingy, marched in from Spain, lasted 7 months before the praetorians butchered him in the Forum and hailed Otho. Otho lasted 3 months before Vitellius's German legions crushed him and gorged themselves on Rome like drunken wolves. Vitellius, fat, lazy, and cruel, ruled for 8 months while the Eastern armies crowned their own man. Vespasian. Civil war again. Bridges burned, cities sacked, the Rhine legions and the Danube legions tearing the empire apart. Can you imagine the panic? Mothers hiding children in cellars while eagles clashed overhead. But out of that bloodbath stepped Vespasian, tough as old leather, a farmer's son who'd fought his way up through sheer grit. He didn't promise miracles, he promised order. And Rome, exhausted, said yes please. He founded the Flavian dynasty, drained the treasury Nero had emptied, taxed the urine collectors, yes, really, and started building something the world still can't believe. The Colosseum, rising out of the artificial lake of Nero's hated palace, turning shame into shared glory. His elder son Titus, kind, handsome, beloved, took the throne and faced 2 catastrophes in 2 years. Vesuvius exploding and burying Pompeii and Herculaneum under boiling ash. Then another fire in Rome. He opened his own purse, worked in the ruins with his bare hands, and the people wept when plague took him after only 2 years. Then came Domitian, colder, paranoid, brilliant, hated. He ruled well, but terrorized the Senate until one terrifying morning in 96 CE, his own court stabbed him to death in his bedroom. The Flavian line ended in blood, just like the Julio Claudians, but this time the Senate and the army did something extraordinary. They chose a mild, elderly senator named Nerva, childless, harmless, perfect. And Nerva did the smartest thing any emperor ever did. He adopted the best man in the empire as his son and heir, Trajan. Spanish-born, battle-hardened, beloved by the troops, Trajan exploded onto the throne like a supernova. He smashed the Dacians, turned their gold mines into Roman treasure, then marched east, Armenia, Mesopotamia, all the way to the Persian Gulf. For one dazzling moment, Rome touched 3 continents, from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. Trajan built roads, bridges, forums in every province, wrote letters to Pliny the Younger that read like love notes to good government. When he died, the Senate didn't hesitate. May you be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan, his chosen heir. Hadrian was different, restless, brilliant, heartbroken. He pulled back from the east, drew a line in the sand, and said, "Here we hold." He travelled the empire for years, boots on every frontier, building libraries, temples, and, in the misty north of Britain, that lonely, heartbreaking wall stretching 73 miles across the wilderness to say, "This far and no farther." Hadrian loved Greek culture, poetry, beautiful boys, and his wife Less. When his beloved Antinous drowned in the Nile, Hadrian wept openly and founded cities in his memory. He chose Antoninus Pius next, a quiet, decent, gentle man who ruled for 23 golden years without ever leaving Italy. No wars, no scandals, just calm, competent happiness. Rome sighed with relief. Then came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, the last of the 5 good emperors. He wanted nothing more than to sit under a tree and read Stoic philosophy. But duty dragged him to the Danube, where Germanic tribes poured across the frozen river like wolves. Plague ravaged the cities. Coffins piled in the streets. Yet Marcus slept in tents with his soldiers, shared their bread, wrote the Meditations by campfire light, words so wise they still stop hearts 2,000 years later. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. For 19 years, he held the line, sick, exhausted, dying inside, but he never broke. When he finally died on the frontier in 180 CE, Rome mourned like a child losing its father. Those 5 men, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus, Marcus, ruled for almost a century not by blood, but by choosing the best man each time. The empire reached its absolute peak. Safe borders, full granaries, laws that worked, art that sang, philosophy that healed. It felt eternal. But Marcus made one fatal mistake. He gave the throne to his son Commodus, a beautiful, spoiled, half-mad boy who thought he was Hercules reborn. And with that single decision, the Golden Age cracked. The long, glittering ascent began to turn downward. And yet, even then, ordinary people across the empire woke up every morning under the Pax Romana and felt something no civilization had ever given them before. Safety. From the olive groves of Spain to the cedar forests of Syria, from the misty cliffs of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, 50 million souls lived under one eagle. They spoke Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Celtic, Punic, 100 languages, worshipped Jupiter, Isis, Mithras, Yahweh, local river gods no Roman had ever heard of. And still the roads were safe, the courts were open, the grain ships sailed on time. Local festivals went on, old gods kept their temples, children learned Homer alongside Virgil. Rome didn't erase, she absorbed. She wrapped the world in a net of law and stone and said, "You are different, but you are mine." For 200 years, from Augustus to Marcus, the world held its breath in the stillness between storms. It wasn't perfect peace. It was Roman peace, enforced by the legions, paid for in taxes and blood. But for millions, it was the closest thing to heaven on earth they would ever know. And when you stand on a quiet Roman road today, 2,000 years later, and feel the stone still solid beneath your feet, you understand why they thought it would last forever. But forever, even for Rome, had an expiration date. Close your eyes with me for just a second. Can you smell it? Olive oil, frying in 100,000 little kitchens. Wood smoke curling up from the apartment blocks. Incense drifting out of a dozen temples. All mixing together in the warm Roman air. That's the scent of the Pax Romana, the heartbeat of the greatest civilization the world had ever seen. Rome wasn't just a city anymore, she was a way of breathing. Walk with me through her streets and feel the rhythm, the noise, the impossible life of it all. Start at dawn. The insulae are already groaning awake, 6, 7 stories tall, leaning against one another like tired giants. Inside those rickety walls, whole families cram into 2 rooms, babies crying, grandmothers stirring porridge over tiny charcoal braziers, while the smell of smoke and garum sauce leaks out the windows. Down in the street, water splashes, buckets clatter, because every morning the poor line up at the public fountains, gossiping, flirting, arguing over whose turn it is. Look up, way up past the laundry, flapping like flags, and you'll see the golden roofs of the temples catching the first light. Somewhere a priest is slaughtering a bull for Jupiter, while the blood runs warm across the altar. Somewhere else, a baker is sliding loaves into a beehive oven that will feed half the neighborhood. The city roars to life, and it never really sleeps again. Now step into the shade of a portico and watch the rich glide past in their litter chairs, silk curtains fluttering, slaves jogging alongside with parasols. Their villas on the hills, oh, you should see them. Sprawling courtyards with fountains that sing all day, walls painted with gardens so real, you'd swear you could pick the roses, mosaics underfoot that tell the story of Achilles or Venus rising from the sea. Dinner parties there last until dawn, couches draped in purple, peacocks strutting between the tables while poets recite and flute girls play. And the smells, spices that cross deserts on camelback, fish sauce from Spain, wine from vines older than the Republic itself. That's the Rome of the elite, dazzling, decadent, untouchable. But everywhere, the empire's fingerprints are on daily life. You drink from an aqueduct that marched 100 miles over mountains just to fill your cup. You walk on roads so solid chariots still thunder across them 2,000 years later. Grain ships the size of apartment buildings dock every day from Egypt, because if Alexandria's fleet is late, Rome starves. Olive oil comes in clay jars, stamped with the emperor's name. Silk whispers across a merchant's stall, carried by caravans that cross Parthia and paid bribes at every border. Even time itself belongs to Caesar. The Julian calendar on every wall, months named for gods and emperors. You pay your taxes in coin that bears the emperor's face. Weigh your bread on scales certified by the Aediles. Swear your oaths in courts, where the law is written in stone for anyone to read. Rome didn't conquer the world and leave it alone. She wrapped it in red tape and marble and said, "Now you're family." And the gods? They're everywhere too. Jupiter still thunders from the Capitoline. But down the street, a temple to Egyptian Isis smells of rose petals and mystery. Soldiers in underground Mithraea slaughterables, in secret ceremonies that promise rebirth. And in the shadows, in tiny house churches, a new faith whispers that the empire's power is nothing next to a carpenter who died on a cross. Most Romans laugh or shrug. Sometimes they arrest a few, light a few torches, but the rumour keeps spreading like ivy through cracks. Out in the provinces, it's the same magic, different flavours. Walk into a town in Gaul and you'll see a perfect little Rome, forum, basilica, baths, theatre, all built by local bigwigs who wanted to prove they belonged. Celtic gods still get their offerings, but now they share the hill with statues of Roman emperors. In Egypt, the ancient temples of Karnak tower beside brand new Roman garrisons, priests in leopard skins arguing tax law with centurions. In Judea, the tension crackles like lightning. Local customs and Roman demands rubbing raw against each other. But everywhere the roads march straight. The aqueducts arch overhead. The legions stand watch. A merchant in Britain can write a contract in York, seal it with Roman wax, and know it will be honoured in Antioch. That's the miracle nobody quite appreciates until it starts to crack. Because beneath all the glory, the pyramid is brutal. Most people never see a villa dining room. Most wake before dawn to work someone else's fields, or hammer iron in a shop that smells of sweat and coal, or carry bricks up rickety ladders for wages that barely buy bread. Slaves, millions of them, faceless, voiceless, born in chains, captured in war, or sold by desperate parents, do everything from tutoring rich children to dying in silver mines so the emperor can mint more coins. Freedom is possible, manumission happens, but for every slave who walks free, 100 more are born into the collar. The empire runs on their broken backs, and nobody talks about it at the banquet. Still, it works. For almost 200 years, it works like nothing before or since. Good emperors, bad emperors, mad emperors, the machine keeps turning. Bread is distributed, games are held. The legions keep the peace. And most people, most days, wake up knowing the world isn't going to end tomorrow. It feels eternal. The marble gleams, the aqueducts sing, the roads stretch to the horizon, and Rome says, "This is forever." But forever has an expiration date. The first tiny tremor comes in 180 CE, when Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, the best man on the throne in 100 years, does the one thing his four predecessors never did. He gives the empire to his son, Commodus. Beautiful, spoiled, half-mad Commodus, who thinks he's Hercules and fights gladiators in the arena, while the Senate grits its teeth and claps. For 12 years, Rome holds its breath, praying the boy grows up. He doesn't. On New Year's Eve, 192 CE, his own inner circle strangles him in his bath. The Golden Age dies with a gurgle in marble-scented water. And then the dam breaks. From 235 to 284 CE, 50 years of pure nightmare. More than 20 emperors, most of them generals dragged onto the throne by their own soldiers, and dragged off it again in pieces months later. The throne becomes a poisoned prize. Seize it, die for it, lose everything. Legions fight legions while barbarians pour across frozen rivers. Gaul breaks away. Palmyra in the east crowns its own dazzling Queen Zenobia and dares Rome to do something about it. Cities burn, trade collapses, coins lose their silver, plague stalks the streets again. In some places, half the population simply vanishes. People whisper that the gods have abandoned Rome, that the empire's pride has finally earned divine wrath. The world that once felt stitched together by Roman genius starts to tear at every seam. And yet, impossibly, it doesn't fall. In the middle of the storm, hard men rise to hold the line. Aurelian, sun-hardened soldier from the Danube, marches like a whirlwind, reconquers the breakaway empires, crushes invaders, drags Queen Zenobia in golden chains through Rome, and earns the title Restorer of the World. He throws up massive new walls around the capital itself, because even Rome isn't safe anymore. For 5 glorious years, he stitches the empire back together. Then his own officers murder him for imagined slights. The crisis doesn't end with a bang or a scream. It ends in 1,000 small betrayals, a slow bleeding out of confidence. The machine that once ran so smoothly is stuttering, coughing, coming apart, gear by gear. And nobody, not the senators in their palaces, not the farmers in their fields, not the soldiers on the frontiers, nobody quite realizes yet that the long, glittering afternoon of Rome is sliding quietly into twilight. Picture it. Can you feel the exhaustion in the very stones? The 3rd century is bleeding out. 50 years of terror where the empire staggers from one funeral to the next. 25 emperors, most of them dead within months, hacked down by their own bodyguards, dragged behind horses, heads on pikes while the coins still bore their faces. The machine that once looked invincible is coughing blood. Cities are half empty, roads cracked, coinage so debased you need a sack of silver to buy bread. Mothers bury children and whisper that the gods have turned their backs. The illusion of eternity is shattered, and every Roman, from senator to slave, knows it in their bones. Something has to change, or everything dies. And then, in 284 CE, a hard-eyed soldier from Illyria named Diocletian steps out of the smoke. No noble blood, no silver tongue, just a man who has seen too many emperors die and decided enough is enough. He doesn't promise glory, he promises structure. He looks at the sprawling, wounded empire and says, one man can't hold this anymore. So he does something insane, something brilliant. He splits the job. He crowns his old comrade Maximian as co-Augustus, hands him the Wild West while he takes the richer, more threatened East. Then, because even 2 isn't enough, he picks 2 younger Caesars, Galerius and Constantius. Tough, loyal, ready to step up when the old men fall. 4 emperors, 4 capitals, 4 pairs of hands on the reins. The tetrarchy. No more pretending Rome is still a republic. No more first citizen nonsense. Diocletian puts on jeweled robes, a diadem that sparkles like the sun, demands that people prostrate themselves, and calls himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. The emperor is no longer a man, he is a living institution, remote, sacred, terrifying. He rebuilds the army, doubles its size, plants fortresses like teeth along every frontier. He rewrites the tax code so brutally honest that farmers know exactly how many chickens they owe and when. He freezes occupations. Your father was a baker, you'll die a baker, because the empire needs bread more than it needs dreams. He turns the bureaucracy into a spiderweb that reaches every village. And when he looks at the Christians quietly refusing to sacrifice to the genius of the emperor, he sees a crack in the dam, so he tries to seal it with fire. The great persecution begins. Churches razed, scriptures burned in bonfires, bishops torn apart by wild beasts, families forced to choose between incense and death. Rome tries to burn the new faith out of its veins, but the blood of martyrs is seed, and the harder Diocletian squeezes, the stronger the faith grows in the dark. Then, in 305 CE, he does the most astonishing thing of all. He quits, voluntarily. The most powerful man in the world lays down the purple, retires to his palace at Split, and spends his last years growing cabbages, while the empire watches in stunned silence. Maximian retires too. The tetrarchy is supposed to slide smoothly to the Caesars. Instead, ambition explodes like a grenade. Sons fight fathers, Caesars fight Augusti, armies clash across the Alps and the Danube. Out of that civil war strides a young man with fire in his eyes and a cross in the sky. Constantine. 312 CE, the Milvian Bridge. The night before the battle that will decide everything, Constantine looks up and sees it, blazing across the heavens. A cross of light and the words, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, conquer. He orders the Christian labarum painted on every shield. The next day he smashes Maxentius, watches his rival drown in the Tiber weighed down by golden armor, and marches into Rome not as another warlord, but as a man touched by a new god. The following year, he and Licinius issue the Edict of Milan. Christianity is legal. No more hiding, no more tortures. The faith that Diocletian tried to strangle is suddenly breathing free air, but Constantine's vision is bigger than tolerance. He wants a new Rome, one that will outlive the old. He sails east, finds the perfect spot where Europe kisses Asia, tears down the old Greek town of Byzantium, and raises a city of marble and gold on 7 hills like the mother city. He calls it New Rome, but the world instantly names it Constantinople. Palaces, churches, forums, walls so thick you can race chariots along the top. He shifts the beating heart of the empire eastward, where the money is deeper, the armies closer, the threats more survivable. Old Rome, the city of Caesar and Augustus, becomes a museum, beautiful, honored, but no longer the center of power. By the time Constantine dies in 337 CE, baptized on his deathbed, the empire is already 2 different beasts. In the west, Latin, senators, crumbling roads, barbarian generals wearing Roman titles. In the east, Greek-speaking courts, golden mosaics, armies that still win. When Theodosius I dies in 395 CE, he splits the empire for good between his 2 young sons. No more pretending it's one family, one empire. There is a Western Roman Empire, ruled from Milan and then marsh-girdled Ravenna, and an Eastern Roman Empire glowing around Constantinople like a jeweled fortress. Diocletian divided to save. Constantine reunited and redirected the soul. Together they dragged Rome, kicking and screaming, out of the Republic, out of paganism, out of the West itself, and pointed it toward a future no one in Augustus's day could have imagined. What began as a muddy village on the Tiber has become 2 continents stitched together by law, language, and faith. One half is already tottering, its emperor's puppets, its legions half barbarian, its cities emptying. The other half is just beginning to flex its muscles. Richer, safer, more vibrant than old Rome ever was. The west is fading into twilight. The east is rising like a new sun, and the word Roman is about to mean something no one in the forum could ever have dreamed. Not just a citizen of a city, but a citizen of an idea that will outlive every stone, every sword, every emperor who ever wore the purple. Can you feel it? The old world is dying, but something fiercer, stranger, and more enduring is being born in its place. The story isn't ending. It's changing its skin. Oh, listen. Can you hear that low, distant thunder rolling closer? That's not a storm. That's the sound of the world changing forever. For centuries, Rome had sneered at everyone beyond her borders, calling them barbarians, spitting the word like poison. But stand on the banks of the Danube in 376 CE and tell me who looks barbaric now. Hundreds of thousands of Visigoths, men, women, old people clutching babies, are huddled there, half-starved, eyes wide with terror, actually begging, to be let inside the empire. They've been driven west by the Huns, those nightmare riders from the endless steppe who burn villages for sport and drink from skulls. The Goths don't want conquest. They want safety. They offer swords, loyalty, children who will grow up speaking Latin, anything. Just open the gates. Emperor Valens says yes. And then Rome does what Rome always does when it smells weakness. The officials in charge see desperate refugees and smell profit. They withhold food, sell rotten grain at gold prices, strip Gothic children for the slave markets. 2 years. 2 years of hunger and humiliation until the fury explodes. Adrianople, 378 CE. A Roman army marches out confident, arrogant, certain these barbarians will break like reeds. Instead, the Goths close like a steel trap. Emperor Valens dies screaming in a burning hut. 2/3 of the army is annihilated in a single afternoon. Rome loses more men in one day than at Cannae, and this time there's no Hannibal to blame, just the people they invited in and betrayed. Can you imagine the silence that fell over the empire when the news arrived? The legions, the unbeatable legions shattered by men who had once begged at the gates, and that was only the beginning. The Visigoths don't leave. They can't. They roam the Balkans, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies, always looking for the one thing Rome keeps dangling and never giving: a home. Their leader Alaric, born inside the empire, trained in Roman ways, once fought for Rome, now turns his sword on a city that rejected him. He wants what every Roman general wants: land, titles, legitimacy. Rome keeps saying no, keeps pushing, keeps treating him like a dog. So in 410 CE, he marches south, and the unthinkable happens. The eternal city, untouched by foreign hands for 800 years, opens her gates. Not stormed, opened, because someone inside decided starving was worse than surrender. For 3 days, Visigothic warriors walk the sacred way. They carry off gold, silver, statues, but, and this is what breaks Roman hearts, they don't burn the churches. Alaric, a Christian himself, orders the city spared total destruction. Rome is humiliated, not annihilated. The psychological blow is worse than flames. If Rome can fall, what on earth is safe? St. Jerome in Bethlehem weeps. The city which took captive the whole world has itself been captured. But the truth is colder. Rome had already been falling for decades. Real power now belongs to generals with barbarian names. Stilicho, half Vandal, holds the West together with genius and blood. until a jealous court executes him and watches the walls crumble. The Vandals, yes, the people who gave us the word vandalism, sweep through Gaul, Spain, and in 439 CE sail into Carthage, Rome's breadbasket. Suddenly, the city that fed 1 million people belongs to a Germanic king who starts raiding Italy for sport. In 455 CE, they sack Rome again, this time with calculated cruelty, stripping palaces, dragging senators' wives by their hair, loading ships so heavy they almost sink. Rome, twice in 45 years, twice humbled by men she once called savages. Then comes Attila, the scourge of God, riding out of the east with a horde that darkens the horizon. In 452 CE, he's at the gates of Rome herself. The emperor is a ghost, the legions are shadows, and who rides out to meet him? Pope Leo I, unarmed, in white robes, carrying nothing but the weight of a new faith. Whatever he says on that road, Attila turns back. Disease, famine, bribes, miracle, nobody knows. Rome breathes for one more moment, but the moments are running out. Emperors now are boys, puppets dressed in purple, while real power belongs to warlords. Ricimer, Odoacer, men with Germanic names who command armies that speak more Gothic than Latin. The West is a patchwork of kingdoms. Franks in northern Gaul, Visigoths in Spain, Ostrogoths in Italy, Vandals ruling the seas from Carthage. They still use Roman law, still mint coins with the emperor's face, still call themselves allies of Rome. But everyone knows the truth. And in 476 CE, the curtain falls so quietly, it's almost comical. The last Western emperor is a teenager named Romulus Augustulus. Little Romulus, Little Augustus. The names of the founder and the first emperor wrapped around a frightened boy who never asked for any of it. His father, a general named Orestes, put him on the throne. Another general, Odoacer, a Herulian with a Roman education and a barbarian army, looks at the child emperor and says, "Enough. No grand siege, no burning palaces." Odoacer marches to Ravenna, accepts the surrender, and simply retires the title. He sends the purple robe, the diadem, the scepter east to Constantinople with a polite note. The West no longer needs its own emperor. One is enough. The Senate still meets. Bishops still preach in Latin. Farmers still plough. But the Western Roman Empire, the Rome of Caesar, of Augustus, of Trajan's columns and Hadrian's wall, is gone. Not with a war cry, not with fire and sword, but with a shrug and a letter. There is no funeral. The aqueducts still flow for a while. The baths still steam. Old men still argue in the forum about laws nobody enforces anymore. Life goes on, quieter, poorer, colder. The lights dim one by one until only shadows remain. And in those shadows, something new begins to stir. Kingdoms that will one day call themselves France, Spain, Italy, carrying Roman law in their bones, Latin in their prayers, and the dream of Rome in their hearts. The West has fallen, but the idea, the impossible, immortal idea, is just beginning its next life. And somewhere across the Bosporus, in a city of golden walls and church bells, the eagle still flies. Rome is dead. Long live Rome. Stand with me on the Golden Horn at sunrise. Can you feel the salt wind off the Bosporus kissing your face? Look east and west at the same moment. Asia on one side, Europe on the other, and right here, right beneath your feet, the city that Constantine planted like a flaming sword between the continents. Constantinople. Not some pale copy of old Rome, no. something fiercer, holier, stranger. Walls rising straight out of the sea like the battlements of heaven itself. Triple layered, unbreached for 1,000 years. Inside, domes float above the mist. Gold and sapphire mosaics catch the first light and throw it back like God himself is waking up. The old Rome on the Tiber is crumbling, grass growing in the forum, wolves howling on the Palatine. But here the heartbeat of the empire still thunders. They never called themselves Byzantine, never. To the last man, woman, and child, they lifted their eyes and said, "We are Romans." Greek on their tongues, crosses on their banners, but Romans all the same. Heirs of Augustus, guardians of the eagle, keepers of the flame. And for centuries it felt invincible. Walk the streets with me. Hear the bells of 1,000 churches answering one another across the water. Smell the incense drifting from Hagia Sophia, that impossible dome that makes grown men weep because it looks like the sky has decided to rest on human shoulders. In the markets, they're selling silk from China, amber from the Baltic, spices that cross deserts on camelback, and every coin still carries the name of the Basilius, the emperor who is God's vice-regent on earth. Out on the walls, the Varangian Guard, giant blonde Vikings with axes and oaths sworn in Norse, stand shoulder to shoulder with dark-eyed Anatolian archers, all of them ready to die for a city that calls itself New Rome. Can you feel the pride? Can you taste the certainty that this is the eternal city now? Then comes Justinian. Oh, Justinian. A peasant son from the Balkans who married a dancer-turned-empress and dreamed the biggest dream any Roman ever dared since Trajan. In the glittering halls, where light fractures into a million colours across the mosaics, he slams his fist on the table and says, "The West is ours again." He unleashes Belisarius, that genius with the gentle eyes and the sword like lightning, and Narses, the eunuch who fought like a demon. North Africa falls in months. The Vandal king dragged in chains through the hippodrome while the crowd roars. Sicily, Rome herself, Ravenna with its shimmering mosaics, all kneel again. For one blazing moment, the Mediterranean is a Roman lake once more. Justinian rebuilds Hagia Sophia after the old one burns, and when the dome rises, higher, lighter, more impossible than anything the world has ever seen, he supposedly whispers, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." He gathers every law since the 12 tables, boils them down, polishes them into the Corpus Juris Civilis, a book of law so perfect it will still be studied when empires unborn are dust. Rome reborn, Rome eternal. But the cost, oh God, the cost. Plague sweeps in from Egypt, bodies stacked in the streets like cordwood, whole neighborhoods silent. The treasury bleeds gold into endless wars. The Lombards pour into Italy the moment Belisarius turns his back. Persia snarls on the eastern frontier. When Justinian dies, the dream dies with him, piece by piece. Territory slips away, the West is lost again, and the empire shrinks behind its walls, licking its wounds but never, ever giving up. Then, in the 7th century, a firestorm out of the desert. Arabia explodes with a new faith, and riders crying, "There is no God but God," sweep across Roman Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa in a single lifetime. Cities that had been Roman for 600 years open their gates or fall to the sword. The empire loses 2/3 of its territory, its richest provinces, its breadbasket, its holy places. Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, gone. Yet Constantinople stands. The walls hold. The emperors endure. They reinvent themselves, smaller, tougher, Greek-speaking, icon-loving, fierce as cornered wolves. They call themselves Roman still, and every morning the bells of Hagia Sophia ring out across the water like a defiance to the world. We are still here. Centuries roll by. They fight off Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, Pechenegs. Anyone who dares knock on the door. They marry their princesses to barbarian kings, bribe enemies with silk and gold, play the great game of diplomacy like chess masters while their armies hold the line. Byzantine art glows with holy fire, icons that seem to breathe, gold that makes the soul ache. Scholars copy Plato and Aristotle by candlelight, while monks argue about the nature of Christ with the passion Romans once argued about Caesar. The empire shrinks, yes, but it never breaks. It becomes a fortress of faith and memory, a golden shield between Europe and the rising powers of the East. And the people believe. They really believe their city is protected by the Virgin herself, that the walls will never fall, that the last Roman emperor will stand on the walls until the second coming. Every Easter the churches overflow. Every victory brings processions that last for days. Every emperor is crowned beneath the great dome while the choir sings like angels. Rome is dead in the West, but here she lives in incense and candlelight, and the sound of Greek hymns echoing off marble 1,000 years old. But nothing lasts forever, does it? By the 11th century, the cracks are showing. The armies are shadows of what they were, mercenaries who fight for pay, not faith. Anatolia, the heartland, slips away to the Seljuk Turks. The treasury is empty. The emperors pawn the crown jewels. The great families feud like wolves. And then, in 1204, the ultimate betrayal. Western knights, crusaders sworn to protect Christendom, turn their swords on Constantinople herself. Greed, old grudges, Venetian gold. They storm the walls, breach the unbreachable, and for 3 days, the queen of cities burns. Churches are looted, nuns raped on altars, the great bronze horses of the hippodrome carried off to Venice, libraries that held the last copies of lost Greek masterpieces fed to the flames. The screams echo across the water, while the crusaders melt down relics for coin and drink themselves stupid in the ruins of the palace. It is not just a defeat, it is sacrilege. The empire fractures into petty states, ruled by Frankish lords who cannot even speak Greek. Yet even then, even broken and bleeding, the Romans rise again. In 1261, Michael Palaeologus slips back into the city almost by stealth, recaptures it, restores the emperor, lights the lamps in Hagia Sophia once more. The mosaics are patched, the liturgy resumes, the eagle flies again, but the wound never heals. The empire is a ghost now, clinging to the city and a few scraps of land. Emperors who pawn their crowns to Venetian bankers, begging the West for help that never comes. And on the horizon, a new storm gathers. The Ottoman Turks, disciplined, hungry, unstoppable, swallow Anatolia piece by piece. City after city falls. The empire shrinks to the walls of Constantinople and a handful of desperate outposts. The emperors write frantic letters to popes and kings. Help us, brothers in Christ. The replies are polite, empty. By 1453, only the city remains. Proud, starving, surrounded. The last emperor, Constantine XI, walks the walls in plain armor, no crown, just a sword and a prayer. For 53 days, the Ottomans hammer with cannons that shake the earth, guns forged by a Hungarian who once offered his services to the emperor and was refused. On May 29th, the walls finally crack. The last Romans fight, street by street, church by church. Constantine tears the imperial eagles from his cloak, so he will die as a common soldier and falls somewhere in the chaos, his body never found. Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, is stormed. The liturgy is interrupted mid-sentence, priests slaughtered at the altar, the great dome that once floated like heaven now echoing with a different call to prayer. Constantinople becomes Istanbul, the Roman Empire in the east, the empire that outlived its western twin by 1,000 years, breathes its last. And yet, stand quietly for a moment. Listen, the laws Justinian wrote still shape courts from Lisbon to Moscow. The icons still glow in 1,000 churches. The stories, the language, the memory, they did not die. Rome fell, yes, but the idea of Rome flew east on golden wings and nested in a city by the Bosporus. And when that city finally fell, the idea scattered like seeds on the wind, carried in books, in prayers, in the blood of exiles who still called themselves Romans, long after the last emperor was dust. The walls are broken, the empire gone, but somewhere a bell still rings. Somewhere a choir still sings in Greek beneath the dome of light, and the echo answers back across 15 centuries. Rome is not dead. Rome is eternal. Citizens in patched armor, monks clutching icons, Genoese crossbowmen, ragged sailors from Crete, even a handful of desperate Catalans, all of them shoulder to shoulder on those ancient walls, screaming defiance into the dawn. Can you hear it? The roar of 50,000 voices rising from the churches, from the rooftops, from every terrified heart. Kyrie Ellison, Lord have mercy. They lit candles, they kissed relics, they sang until their throats bled, begging for the miracle that had saved the city 12 times before. But on that black morning of May 29th, 1453, heaven stayed silent. The walls, the unbreakable walls that had laughed at Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Crusaders, cracked like eggshell under the thunder of Mehmed's monstrous cannons. The gates splintered. The Janissaries poured through in a red tide, and somewhere in the smoke and screaming, the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI Palaeologus, tore the imperial jewels from his cloak so no one would know him for a prize, grabbed a plain sword and charged into the breach. A man whose bloodlines stretched back across 1,000 years of purple and gold vanished into the crush. Sword still swinging, body never found. Rome's final heartbeat stopped in a narrow street running with blood. Hagia Sophia, the church that held the sky on its shoulders, fell silent. The great silver icons were ripped down, the altars smashed. The bells that had called 1 million souls to prayer were torn from their ropes. Then the conquerors swept in, not as vandals, but as heirs. They washed the floors, hung green banners, and turned the holiest space in Christendom into a mosque. Constantinople woke up as Istanbul, and the Roman Empire, the empire that once stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the burning sands of Mesopotamia, breathed its very last. And yet, close your eyes. Do you feel it? Rome didn't die. She scattered. She slipped into the laws that still govern half the world, into the Latin roots of every Romance language, into the very shape of our churches and parliaments. She lives in the dreams of czars who call themselves Caesar, and Kaisers who wore her eagle, in libraries where Justinian's code is still studied, in the stones of cathedrals built by men who never saw the Tiber but knew they were her children. From a shepherd's hut on 7 hills to the golden walls that kiss 2 continents, Rome lasted more than 2,000 years. She conquered, she governed, she adapted, she endured. She wrote laws in marble, raised gods and buried them, taught the world that power could feel eternal. But power never is. Only memory endures. Only story remains. And this one, this wild, heartbreaking, glorious story of marble and blood, of gods and emperors, of a city that refused to die for 2 millennia, is yours now. Hold it close, whisper it in the dark, because as long as you remember, Rome is still breathing. Good night.